I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Farhana Yamin, and I'm a climate lawyer and an activist. I write as an academic on climate policy issues. I used to teach a lot more students of masters. And I guess my other hat is that I work in the last 10 years or so with philanthropies, with foundations and individuals who are giving for climate activism and climate diplomacy. I'm also a Muslim. I'm also a mother. I'm a nerd, and I have dual nationality and dual heritage. So I'm originally from Pakistan, and I came to this country when I was about 9. So that's a little nutshell, a little portrait of me.
Extinction! Thank you. This is one of the youth strikes.
I'd like to start by asking you to explain for those who do not follow very closely the climate negotiations why COP26 was not as ambitious as it should be.
In a nutshell, is lack of political will. We have seen through the COVID crisis, we have seen now with the Ukraine and Russia war, that when there's an emergency, when politicians really feel that there is a threat, then they mobilize all of the instruments that governments have, the army, the military, health professionals, money, the treasuries. And we have not done that with climate change. And that is why COP26 still fell short, and every other COP before it, because this gap in political will in addressing and tackling a problem that is so immense has been deferred, has been delayed every year. Every year, the next politicians will take care of it. Every year, the next, in 5 years' time, we'll take care of it. So this mentality that it's a future problem that someone else will deal with is the main reason why we're now facing, really horrific consequences.
Many people now say that climate justice needs to be a central part of the climate solutions, but how to make this work?
Well, it seems a good rallying cry and an obvious one that people and the planet should be at the center of our decision-making processes. Everyone would kind of agree that. But the truth is that people and the planet are not at the center of our decision-making. They're not at the center of our economic systems. Growth and GDP and business as usual are. And the interests of the financial sector, for example, the interests of the fossil fuel industry, the interests of large corporations, these are at the center of our economic and financial and political systems. These are the powerful actors, the powerful voices, the powerful framings, not the protection and well-being of people, not the protection and well-being of the planet. And this is such a fundamental shift that needs to change, that saying it plainly that climate justice demands that people and the planet's interests be put first. Practically, you can make this happen by regulating the industries and the countries that have caused the pollution, that have caused the biggest harms. We've used a lot of voluntary approaches. We've been very nice to them. And for the last 30 years, we've been doing essentially voluntary measures, and we've been using markets, and we've been using technology to try and change things. We haven't really used regulation. We haven't said to the fossil fuel industry globally, we want a phase out of greenhouse gases, and therefore you should end exploration of no new oil and gas, for example, and coal. The coal industry is still a huge emitter. Rather, we've allowed them to carry on thinking that they can expand. The same is true of agriculture, which is very destructive. We've said, oh, please stop ending this deforestation, as if adding a polite plea will solve the problem. We have not regulated and really legally enforced rules that we already have, including, for example, in Brazil, that protect the land and the rights of indigenous people, that protect areas that are already meant to be under regulation. So we've allowed a free-for-all. We've allowed business as usual to essentially continue, and that is why emissions are still increasing.
You were one of the persons who helped craft the Paris Agreement. What are currently the more urgent actions to attain its main goal? Considering new challenges such as the war in the Ukraine, it seems that the oil production and trade is changing a lot. Is this a problem or an opportunity?
So the goal of the Paris Agreement is to keep global temperatures well below 2 degrees and nearer to 1.5. And I think since the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, the world has recognized, largely as a result of the scientific advice and the determination of the most vulnerable countries, that the 1.5 goal is actually the more scientific necessary goal. And we're already seeing huge impacts already at 1.1 degrees, which is roughly where we are. So we now have, and I think it's a big gain that the whole world recognizes that we must be nearer to 1.5 and that 2 degrees is no longer acceptable. And one of the achievements of COP26 was saying that, and that repeated, concerted recognition by every country that 1.5 to stay alive was our goal. It wasn't just 2 degrees. In this decade, 8 years here that we have, we must cut global emissions roughly by half. Climate justice demands that those who are vulnerable not have to bear additional impacts, and that the support, the financial support, the humanitarian support, the development support that is out there must be aligned. So it's delivery of the 100 billion. There's an agreement that the 100 billion has to be a floor. And so there's now negotiations that has been started, which is on what's called the new quantified collective goal for finance. So what should be the finance goal for the future, essentially after 2025. These things frankly mean that we have to drastically change our lifestyles and drastically require absolute accountability of our politicians. It's no longer enough to leave it to every 4 years of an election cycle or every 5 years.
What was the agenda of the ClimateVulnerable Forum in this climate meeting in Bonn last June? Could you briefly share with us what are the main priorities of this group until the next climate summit in November?
The ClimateVulnerable Forum is a group of now 55 countries from the smallest and most vulnerable nations like Vanuatu, like the Marshall Islands, like the Pacific Island countries, like the Maldives, as well as larger countries like Bangladesh, for example, and the Philippines. But all of these countries felt they had to come together and negotiate as a bigger group so that their voice could be heard. You know, they're still too small politically in terms of their weight. And in Bonn, one of the reports that they produced was showing how much their economies are suffering as a result of climate change already. So, for example, one of the headline findings was that they would be 20% wealthier if climate change had not happened already. It's already impacting their economies. Their economies are not growing. They're losing several percent of GDP, sometimes 5 or 6%, sometimes 1%. You know, 1% decrease in GDP is a lot. They are pushing for the highest level of ambition. So they're asking all of the other countries to come back to the negotiating table as early as the next COP, which is in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in November, with increased ambitions, including countries like Brazil.
And I would like to ask you, why have you left the Extinction Rebellion movement? And what were the main lessons learned from this very unique experience?
I was tired, I was exhausted. I had burnt out, you know, it was very intensive. Being in rebellion the whole time is very intensive. Being an activist is quite intensive. So I left largely because of that, and because I knew that the COP was also going to happen in the UK. I wanted to come back and work with foundations and with philanthropy, which is what I'm doing right now. And I think Extinction Rebellion, I have to say, it is quite an incredible achievement to have, you know, sparked this wave of action. So after the first year, by 2020, we had thousands of cities and councils and non-state actors and countries that had declared a climate emergency, including the UK. So now there is a constant pressure and a demand, and I think Extinction Rebellion really helped that process, along with, Fridays for Future and, people like Greta and other movement leaders from the global south. So it's I'm very proud of my time in it, and think that it really created a lot of disruption, which was good.
Given that not everyone is willing to have activists on their CV, as you said in an interview that they should, what could we ask from those who are not inclined to become activists, but still could contribute to the cause of climate?
Well, I think everyone can make changes in their life. And for me, the word activist is then really a way of understanding that you're changing your own life, and your own business as usual is being an activist. You don't all have to go on a march. You don't all have to get arrested. You don't all have to be part of a movement, but actually making sure that you examine your diet. You maybe are more conscious of recycling and reducing your fashion and purchasing choices. Fashion is a huge contributor. Everyday changes really matter. And what I've been investigating more and more is actually, how does my high street look different? How can we bring ordinary people together, whether it's in schools, in shops, in bakeries, in villages, in town halls, in shopping centers? What does that global change that I'm fighting for look like in my own surroundings?
Why do you say that at the moment we need more storytellers than scientists to tackle the climate crisis?
Yeah, I said that because I think in my head, the old paradigm was that science would produce all these books and reports. We would have the truth, and then our politicians would realize, that action was needed, and they would act. And actually, that's not how the real world works. In this case, the fossil fuel industry and the big corporates told a better story. They said, yeah, the scientists are saying that, but that's all far away in the future. Really, you've got all these jobs to think about. You've got your own constituencies to think about. You've got your elections to think about. And that's the story that the politicians decided to believe and act on. They're still in that story. They don't want to choose a different future. We need to listen to different forms of leadership. And the voices, frankly, of resistance and imagination come in very different ways. And so I think, the power of film, the media, the creative industry is what we need, as much as, just the scientists' reports. Reason isn't enough. We also need the heart. We also need sharing. We also need all of the other senses to come with us on this journey. So that's why I think the stories and the artists are such a powerful new and additional actor we haven't seen engage really in this space. I don't mean just campaigns like better graphics and better sort of communications. I think that's only part of the story. I think we really need the creative industries and everyone's creativity to really tackle how we define a completely different way of living.